We will continue with Leslie Deschler Canossi from the US. Interconnected Bodies, Women, Water, and Photographic Urgency. Leslie is a photography educator and a cultural producer. She holds an MFA of Maryland Institute College of Art and is a faculty member at the International Center of Photography in New York. Her research reframes the history of photography to reflect a story of innovation that includes women. In 2016, she co-created Women Picturing Revolution, an organization dedicated to women identifying photographers who have documented conflicts and crises in private realms and public spaces. In 2023, she co-edited Black Matrilineage. Am I correct on this?
Matrilineage.
Okay, thank you. Photography and Representation. Another Way of Knowing. It's from the Leuven University Press. Her personal and teaching practice centers on care, feminist mothering, and grief. So, thank you.
Thank you so much. Good morning. Thank you to everyone. 2 amazing talks to follow, so thank you. As I began writing the paper on how women in photography communicate climate impact through pictures, 3 themes emerged: grief, mothering, and resilience. Water as a poetic device or as a visual theme is beautiful, but in this case, of less interest to me, as there's a clear line from access to water. Clean water in particular is a frontline issue in resource extraction. So today I'll focus on 3 photographers whose work use exposure I'll focus on 3 photographers whose work could use exposure, such in spaces like these so full of potential. I will connect these photographers whose work is understudied and I believe underrepresented. I aim to present a perspective employing documentary strategies to unveil a more comprehensive narrative on how our collective water resources are urgently linked with climate injustice and gender inequality. Perhaps more importantly, I will offer an entry point for challenging conversations, visualizing an urgent call to action. I hope someone in this room will feel moved by this work, extending a portal to its visibility. Climate impact in the water are not simple to represent. The politicalization of resources means we must find a way to show how varying forms of inequity intersect and magnify each other. The visual language employed to articulate interconnectedness of nature and gender highlights the dynamic ways in water becomes a medium through which ecofeminist ideologies are expressed. We've emitted as much atmospheric carbon in the past 30 years as in previous 2 centuries of industrialization. Photographer Camille Seaman has seen a dramatic ice loss in her polar expeditions over the past 20 years. While she centers hope as a weapon against climate grief, she wonders what more pictures of ice will do, if anything, to impact change in a positive direction. The work of Fabiha Munar, we see an immediate impact of melting ice on women's reproductive health, highlighting the urgent aspects of climate crisis disrupting the lives of women who are already the most vulnerable. And finally, Ronnie Farley's extensive 30-year project, Women of the Native Struggle, Portraits and Testimonies of Native American Women, offers a visual record of North American indigenous cultures where women are often seen as metaphors for Mother Earth and are deeply connected to land and water. Photographer Camille Seaman has professionally recorded the Arctic and Antarctica for over 20 years. In a recent conversation with her, I learned that she had just returned from an 80-day trip to Antarctica. While many trips are on research vessels, others, she works as a photography guide and shared that many tourists are coming, as they say, to, quote, see it before it's gone in a kind of doomsday tourism. For her, this is counterproductive. She hopes to create ambassadors to shift that perspective and ask participants to share what they have seen with their friends, family, and community. I have long admired her drive and approach to storytelling. She says, quote, art is not only important, we must communicate what is happening on our planet. Without art, I don't think we can ever truly communicate climate change. Being a woman in exploration photography, being a woman in Arctic exploration, being a BIPOC woman in a highly technical role in photography are things to acknowledge. Seaman was born in 1969 to Indigenous American father and an African American mother and spent her childhood in Long Island, New York, a thin strip of land surrounded by water. She was heavily influenced by her father's side of the family, who was part of the Shinnecock tribe indigenous to the land. As a child, Seaman's grandfather walked her with her in the woods, introducing her to the tree and saying, quote, "This is your relative the same way I am your relative, and you must respect it." Her grandfather was adamant about children knowing they're interconnected and interrelated, not separate from nature, as you cannot remove one part without removing another. At 29, she was given a free ticket to Alaska, but she was not interested in Alaska, she says. But her sense of adventure called, and she went to Kotzebue, a city in northwest Arctic borough in Alaska. The area is considered to be a land bridge to Siberia, and her ancestral history claims that this ice bridge was the migration path across during the last ice age. In closeness to her ancestors, she wanted to feel like how it was to walk across the ice. To hear Seaman speak about her ice walk is something special. The depth of which she felt rooted on the ice, on her rock in space, as she calls it, was phenomenal. You can hear it in her voice. It was on this day that Seaman fully realized that she was of this earth. This was her rock in space, and she was an earthling. Her awakening as an earthling is in tandem with her awakening as a mother, as she was 3 weeks pregnant. Seaman came to photography at 32 when she witnessed the World Trade Center falling. She knew that was the only way her young daughter would know these buildings was through photography. In making images, Seaman understood herself as a witness. Thank you. According to Seaman, something about those polar places seems so otherworldly. It triggers an understanding that we are on a planet, she says. When you are thrust into the polar regions, coming from a place where you experience temperate climates, your body shifts, she says, morphing into a deeper understanding that you are on our planet. When she saw her first giant tabular icebergs in Antarctica, she understood she was looking at thousands of years of water from her ancestors. She asks, how many snowflakes is this? And how much ancestors' water is this? In each photograph of ice, she's recording water, the water our bodies share with the earth, and in turn making a portrait of our ancestors. Her extensive archive of photographs chronicles thousands of glaciers and icebergs that are currently headed to their demise or have since disappeared. Witnessing this kind of frozen time, legacy, and history has her asking, what is the cycle? What are the stories of ice? Where do they come from, and where do they end up? If Camille Seaman is interested in stories of ice, where do they end up? It's in the images of Fabina Moer that we see an immediate impact of melting ice on women's health. Moner, a visual journalist from Dhaka, Bangladesh, uses still images, text, video to provide multifaceted storytelling. She's a humanist photographer who tells people-focused stories exploring social development, migration, and forced exile into marginalized communities. Trained as a writer, but out of necessity for true collaboration, she picked up her camera. She's gained access and trust to women, has amplified the voices of textile workers, midwives, and those impacted by gender-based violence. In Land of Despair, we see that coastal Bangladesh climate change devastates women's reproductive health as water is becoming increasingly salty. The salt comes from the Bay of Bengal, where Bangladesh's significant rivers meet the sea. Hundreds of rivers snake across the country in the 8th most populous of the world, bolstered by the planet's largest mangrove forests. While mangroves provide many benefits, including vital erosion control, they're often cleared for aquaculture, farming, and settlements. It's estimated that 20 to 35% of the world's mangroves have been lost since 1980. As global temperatures rise and glaciers melt, the region's lone-line delta can only do so much to stave off the rising sea. These impacts have far-reaching implications, and among these, most at risk are women living in parts of the world that are least responsible for global warming, yet are often powerless to stop the consequences. Munir shares that thousands of Bangladeshi women faced devastating reproductive health issues caused by increasing salt content in their waters in which they live and work, threatening not only their health and safety, but also the well-being for their families and stability. Work is limited, and waiting in water all day in fishermen's service is one of the few options for women. Munir has met many locals who do not understand climate change, rising temperatures, or global connection, but everyone at the forefront at climate change knows they have quickly lost much of what they have accumulated through generations. Women suffering infections and losing a uterus is now not uncommon. They are shy and ashamed. With few options and the high cost of clean water, women bathe and sometimes consume saline water. The water is no longer usable as local ponds become increasingly salty. This is an urgent issue at the intersection of environmental health and gender concerns, calling for greater attention, research, and action. Munir found that researching these issues is difficult due to limited scientific evidence and data indicating the gap in understanding or interest in the full extent of the problem. She conducted fieldwork and interviews visiting places like Friendship Hospital, a low-cost medical institution in Bengal, southwest Bangladesh, and interviewed women directly to understand their experiences and challenges. She often asked women how they would like to be photographed, and they co-created the images. And she found that in one isolated community where healthcare is financially and physically out of reach, a local woman of 90-plus years traveled on a little boat to spread awareness and encourage women to see midwives and doctors. Munir's motivation for this project is to bring a deeper perspective to the world's leaders, and she believes that if decision makers see losing one's uterus as horrific, it's a way to humanize the story of climate degradation. It's not only about the terrible loss of stress, trauma, and uncertainty of life of what's coming next. She wants to be sure these facts are included in data, statistics, and climate degradation. It's so nice to see these images so large when you spend so much time with these artists and admire them so much. Just want to take a minute. Ronnie, such a wonderful person. For over 30 years, photographer Ronnie Farley, a New York native, has documented Indigenous women and their communities in the United States. Her life's work began in 1985 when she, quote, left the workforce and the mainstream grind to devote herself to photography. At that time, she was living in a tenement building in Lower Manhattan, and her neighbor's brother was working closely with the Dene, as the Navajo call themselves, in an area of northwest Arizona called Big Mountain. The Dene faced forced removal from their lands for a national energy policy developed decades before. The policy included the mining of coal and uranium fields. Corporations were exploiting resources while perpetuating false narratives of tribal conflicts, all while disregarding environmental and health consequences. When she began this work, she quickly realized that this is important for me. When she began this work, she quickly realized that the land was there because someone took responsibility for stewardship. The wars of her land never ended, and the Indigenous people continued to fight for justice and protect their way of life. Everywhere she went, some new injustice was happening in the community. They were fighting to preserve land, protect water, fluoride poisoning in the water, prevent toxic waste dumping, uranium digging from contaminating the water. It seemed never ending. At the forefront of resistance to environmental injustices were, and still continue to be, women such as Maya Sohapi Ngetsi who continued to fish the rivers of the Northwest as old treaties stipulated, ignoring new unjust laws. They were arrested, harassed, and beaten. This is not unlike the Dene women of Big Mountain who would not give up their flocks to sheep for uranium mining, which threatened their water sources. Farley says, like the earth, they do not move. At the time of this photograph, May Wilson Tsao, a grandmother and traditional sheep herder, had been fighting relocation from her home in Mosquito Springs of Big Mountain since 1974. Sorry, there's a second slide, but it's not plain. It's kind of a pan of her new book that she's working on, and there's about 200, 300 images on the wall. It's really fascinating to see how she's working out, but that's fine. It's just to let you all know that there's research in the works for a new book. Let's see, lost my... Okay, Farley traveled for over 40,000 miles in 30 years, making Women of the Native Struggle a testimony of Native American women. Interviews written and recorded on high-8 and thousands of photographs made on film and some in digital make up this substantial, there it is, sorry, make up this substantial understudied and underseen work. Years ago, when Farley was shopping for work for publication, there was no interest in Native stories, and that is, she was told the stories of the past. I think, in fact, the reason it was not published is because it's not sensationalized. It's a very quiet body of work with a lot of very personal stories. In my view, these stories are a roadmap to resistance. If you look closely at the pictures and read the captions, do a bit of research on the people in the photographs, you can learn how to organize against oppressive forces through the lived experiences of these women. Following Native struggle, Farley documented Dakota Access Pipeline protest to Standing Rock as Water is Life became the national and international call. Resistance to the Dakota Access Pipeline, known by the hashtag NoDAPL, NoDAPL, was a youth-led movement against the United States Army Corps, which continued to ignore their pleas to protect drinking water needed for Sioux reservations communities, agricultural production by Native and non-Native farmers and ranchers. Tribal youth, grassroots, and elected leaders launched a community horseback ride from Standing Rock Tribal Headquarters in Fort Yates, North Dakota, on April 1st, 2016, and stayed. Women ceremonially take the responsibility of carrying water, underscoring its sacred importance within Indigenous rituals. Farley was inspired by the Nibi Walkers, a group of Indigenous women who organize water walks. With Water is Life as the call, they set out for days or weeks carrying water gathered from one source to deposit to another. Water works are implemented in faith for water spirits and faith for humankind. And in many of her conversations, Farley was reminded that women are considered the first environment as the womb carries water, symbolizing a child's first connection to water. In 2019, Farley set out on her own water walk. On Earth Day, she collected water from the Shoshari Reservoir in New York with Indigenous friends who initiated the walk with a water song. She created a shared walk. Participants carried the water over 150 miles from its source in Catskills to New York City, where millions rely on it without ever considering how it gets from their faucets. This work encourages us to know our water, and Farley believes that if we know where our water comes from and understand what a precious resource it is, we will work to protect it. According to Farley, the distance, infrastructure, and communities supporting New York's water needs a more visceral conversation about water as a living entity instead of a corporate entity, a corporate commodity. The resultant work, Walking the Watershed from Catskills to New York City 2021, comprises over 90 images, video formats, and recorded sounds. And here on the right, we see a picture of the artist returning the water to its source, the Jacqueline Onassis Reservoir in Central Park. Recognizing that women are at the forefront of picturing and mitigating the impacts of climate change and justice is important. As our keynote speaker from yesterday perfected, no one is coming to save us, and we know what is coming, Our ability to gain control of resources away from corporate entities fueled by imperialist capitalist structures is limited. However, I return to Farley's words. The land was preserved because someone took responsibility for its stewardship. We need a mass awakening of stewardship. How can we as artists, educators, curators, and academics puncture existing structures that obscure the reality of what is possible? We know it is possible and the knowledge exists. Finding ways to visualize what is unseen and unknown and make visible the invisible visible is challenging. It requires a deep-held belief that one more picture will allow empathetic space to open a mind, creating a personal connection to the natural world worth fighting for. There we go. Let's see if it plays. Oh. This was something I had asked Camille to share, a moving image, which she generally doesn't do, and I find them just totally breathtaking. This is Antarctica Peninsula. Thank you so much.